Started. I am Krista Sampson. I am here with the author Victor Sampson, and I will hand it over to him.
Fantastic. Thank you, Krista. To get started today, Krista will be moderating for me while I'm doing the presenting of the webinar here. So I'll kind of explain how that works here as that's going on. She'll be letting more people in from the lobby and things like that as they come up. So really excited about what we've just released. So we have released 6 new books for middle school. There are 3 that are written around the NGSS and 3 that are written that for Texas specific. And so some of you may be familiar with kind of our older books, the ones with these white covers here that were released about 10 years ago. So we wanted to really talk about how these new books are different than the older versions of things that we have published in the past. So the first one, and I think it's the most important, is our new books use the updated ADI instructional model. So when we first published these books in about 2012, the ADI instructional model looked like this. And we call this actually version 2 because the very first version was in my classroom even around 2007, 2008. So this was the first version that we published in these books. And at that time, it had 8 stages of activity. It kind of looked like this. So once we publish these new books, they are now using our new updated model that looks like this, where we've got these 7 stages. And with this graphic, what we try to illustrate is that if you think of each stage as a set of activities or things you're trying to accomplish, those dots that are inside those buckets or those stages are the number of different kinds of activities you would be engaging the students in as they're moving through this. And you may be wondering why we changed the model, and that really comes from spending more and more time in the classroom. So as you develop new instructional approaches, it's never a good thing when they become static, right? We're learning new things about how people learn. We're trying out things. We're listening to folks in classrooms. So we always are taking that feedback and through kind of design-based research, modifying these. So this is the most current instructional model version of ADI that we've got, and we want to make sure that those are in the new books. Because we have all of these new are using the newest version of the instructional model, all of our books include brand new investigations. So any of the older ones do not look the same at all when it comes to investigations. So as I was kind of going through this, each of the books have 8 new investigations that are brand new in there. So these are for the NGSS. Life science has 8, physical science has 8, and earth-space science has 8. Then if you go into 6th grade Texas, you've got a set of physical, earth, and life that are aligned to the TEKS. Same thing with 7th, and same thing with 8th. So these can be they're brand new, haven't been seen before. Even if they're kind of building off an old one, they've been completely modified and updated based on our new instructional approach. A third big piece is that all of our investigations in our new books are 3D. So with the NGSS, there's a 3-dimensional approach to science, but also now in Texas with our new standards being updated, there's a focus on the 3 dimensions. So for those of you that are not completely familiar with what we mean by 3-dimensional instruction or the 3 dimension of science, you can kind of think of it through this graphic, right? So the 3 pieces of science, you can think of these as science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So the science and engineering practices are the things that people do who are affiliated or do science to try to figure out new things about how the world works. The disciplinary ideas are then the important theories, models, or laws that are specific to each discipline that people tend to use as a starting point. So if they see something going on in the world, can I use a disciplinary core idea to explain that right off the bat? Okay. Usually that allows you to do that. Sometimes that doesn't work. So when that doesn't work, then you can turn to what's called cross-cutting concepts. And these are kind of these frameworks or lenses that work across disciplines that help guide you on what you want to look for or think about while you're engaging in the practices to figure something out. So if those are kind of the three dimensions of science, you can think of instruction matching that. So you can think of teaching things in isolation. So either kind of focusing on the core ideas where students are learning about concepts, or learning about the practices, which would be more of a kind of a hands-on activity without content to kind of nature of science kind of thing, or focusing on cross-cutting concepts, those themes. When you start overlapping them, then it becomes two-dimensional, right? So the most common two-dimensional one is kind of inquiry-based instruction, where students are learning about a concept by engaging in a practice, like say designing and carrying out an investigation. Or you can learn about a cross-cutting concept that's multiple by engaging in investigation as well. Where it becomes three-dimensional is when you're using all three of those things at the same time, or at least students are, where they're using ideas, a framework, and multiple practices to figure something out. And that's what we're trying to do with all of our investigations, is have all three elements where students are using those as tools to figure out the world around them. So this is the NGS version of this. In Texas, we've also based our new standards around that, but we call them a little bit different. So the science and engineering practices are still there. The cross-cutting concepts are not called that. They're called recurring themes and concepts, but they're the same ones. And then the disciplinary core ideas becomes kind of the disciplinary content of our standards, the things that students need to know. So that's just kind of how you can think about how all these things overlap in that way. Now, fourth big feature of the new books is that each NGS investigation targets a specific performance expectation that's found in the NGSS, and it's 100% aligned with the DCIs, CCs, and SCPs that are in that PE, that performance expectation. And the Texas investigations target, since we don't have performance expectations or our standards aren't written that, they always target a disciplinary content teak, a recurring theme and concept teaks, and multiple science and engineering practice teaks. Let me show you what that looks like real quick. So if you're looking at one of the NGSS books, the performance expectations will look like this, where you have something like develop a model, describe the cycling of matter and flow of energy among living and non-living parts. So what we did is we designed an investigation that helps students be able to do that performance expectation. And what we do is focus on the practices first. So in that case, you're going to be developing models, which is the one not only in the performance expectation, but they're going to be hitting all of these other practices as well when they engage in that. But we also wanted to make sure the kids are using the core ideas and the cross-cutting concepts that are found in there. So for example, in the idea stage, they'll read about the moment, they'll start thinking about the movement of energy and matter in ecosystems, which is the disciplinary core idea found in this performance expectation. And they'll start thinking about models that are talking about that it works with energy flow and matter with the cross-cutting concepts as well. For Texas, what we did is we focused on a practice, a recurring theme of concepts, and a disciplinary content. So for example, in this one that's called Teeter Board Act, what we wanted to do is make sure that students were designing, carrying out investigations, analyzing data, and communicating explanations. So those are all built into the investigation. But then when they start going into the ideas, we can start going into the recurring themes about examining and model the parts of their systems and their independence. So we have kids start thinking about that as a tool. Or the disciplinary content in TEAK 8 here, where they're thinking about energy transfer and transformations and conservation. So they're all pulled exactly in there and tied together. So kids are using all of these ideas that are found in the standards throughout the investigation. The next thing we wanted to make sure that we're really happy about in our new books is that the 3D investigations give students a reason to develop their literacy skills. So often we think about kind of literacy as something that's done only in ELA, but it's really a big part of doing science as well. So when you start thinking about things like reading in the content area, whether you're using Common Core or Texas ELA standards, these are things that students need to be able to do to gather information. So the idea of reading a text and supporting, using textual evidence to support their response, or write responses that demonstrate understanding of text. these are built in there so students have more and more opportunities to learn how to do that within the context of science. Same with speaking and listening. For example, the share stage of these investigations gives kids opportunities to come to discussions prepared or actively listen to other people, ask clarifying questions, follow and give oral instruction. So all of these standards that are such a focus in ELA, and they have to come up with a context for doing this, we're actually just doing this in science as a part of figuring things out in the world around us. Same thing with writing. If you're Common Core, there's a huge focus on writing arguments. In Texas, there's the importance of writing first drafts, develop drafts into a focused, structured, and coherent piece of writing, revising, editing. All of these are super important, and we build those right into the report stage of this approach. Sixth big difference is the investigations in our book are a great way to make a language-rich learning environment that supports new language acquisition. So one of the biggest things that we start thinking about, whether you're using kind of the WIDA framework outside of Texas or using the ELPS here in Texas, is thinking about how do you help students develop a new language when it's their second, maybe third or fourth language. Where do they have the opportunities to do that, and how do they learn science at the same time? So when we start looking at these standards, most of them are things that we're asking that are very specific, especially if you're thinking about WIDA for science. Things like identifying convincing evidence from data, developing valid and reliable evidence from sources about a phenomenon, right? ELPS are speak using content area vocabulary. Restate asks questions about and respond to information. Spell words following conventions. So all of these don't have to be separate lessons. They are built in to give students an opportunity to develop their skills over time by doing this kind of activity inside science classrooms. 7, all the investigations in the new books are designed to be split into 50-minute time blocks. So one of the things that I find is really hard about learning science is time, right? That we have a lot of things that we need to address, and we have these 50-minute periods. And do we focus more on one lesson per period, or do we focus on how long it takes for students to learn something? And so we think about it as terms of longer periods of time to give students a chance to be exposed to new ideas, discuss them, and then finally use them to make sense of the world. But in terms of instruction, you can make that easier for teachers by being able to chop up a sequence of stages into multiple days so it works better. So for example, here, what we've done is we've made these materials so in day 1, in 50 minutes, you can do the first 2 stages. In day 2, you can do the next 2, plan and do. In day 3, you can do the share stage. In day 4, you can start with reflect and do a draft of your report. And then in the last day, you can peer review and do your final. So it makes it an easy way to kind of chop this up into 50-minute periods. And then if you have longer periods, say 80 minutes or 100, you can move these around, and we give recommendations for that in the books as well. Speaking of that, not only trying to make these things consistent with time, we're also trying to think about new ways to make the investigations easier for teachers to use. Like, these look different than a lot of us learn science or were taught how to do science. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what goes into the teacher notes in a way that'll make it not overwhelming, but easy to find the information you need. So here's kind of what the teacher notes ends up looking like. So we always start with overview. We give that stages where you can kind of chop things up into different pieces, recommendations on that. Then you have your overall standards alignment, that all the things that you can address through this one investigation. Then we add things about the content, the disciplinary content and the cross-cutting concepts or recurring themes, depending on what state you're in. Preparation, what kinds of things that you need if you're using hands-on materials or a simulation. It talks about how all of that works. And then by each stage, we break each of those stages into their different activities. So then when you move in the activities, you can say, okay, what's our learning goals? Those are the specific objectives that you're using in this stage that'll build toward the bigger standard. And then the activities with the stage, we try to lay it out of what to do, what to give out, and what to show on the screen. And then we also add teaching tips and ways to attend to equity in your classroom of better to meet the needs of all of the different students inside your classroom. So we can start giving advice. We give tips about that along with all of these activities that are through the notes. But it's really easy to kind of flip through this and see where you are and follow along. The other thing we built is we made our learning hub so each of these books come with what we call a book view or a book module. So they come with a code that you add in. And once you get your book, you go to Learning Hub, create an account, add in that code where it says add new book, and then the book appears. And then what you can do is you can click on that book and then it brings up all of this information as well for you. So it'll have all the investigations that are in that book for you. So on this one, we've got like selective breeding of sunflowers. You can look at the investigations, the standards, the materials that are all there. The button where it says handouts, you can click on that. You can download everything you need for handout wise and then make photocopies of them and give to students. The coolest thing, though, I think, is the presentation mode. When you click on that button, it brings you up basically a slide deck that you can use. So this is all the information on the handouts. So you can show this on the screen. It all has all the color images that are found in the book that don't always show up well on a black and white handout. You can actually click on those images and they blow up really large, so it's easier for kids to see. And then you can move through that, and there are all the videos and all the other things that are in there. And it's all tied to clickers. So if you have this running, you can just use a clicker as you're walking around the classroom and being able to kind of guide students through these investigations. The last the last couple things, or the thing to think about, is that our investigations also give students a chance to make sense of data and collect using a simulation or hands-on. And then we made it as easy as possible to get the simulations or the materials that you need to do this. Like, we really want students doing science, not just reading about science or listening to somebody talk about science or watching somebody do science. We want them to collect data as much as we can. So if you're using a simulation in there, those are all tied in through that presentation mode. So they will allow, that'll tell you how students can get to those simulations for free and access those. And if it recommends hands-on materials, it includes a list of all the materials that you need, how to set it up. And then in the back of each book, you can have a master list of everything that you want. So you can source all of these materials or look in closets and find that stuff. If you don't want to go that route, you can also get either a specific kit for an investigation, or you can get a kit for every investigation that are found inside the book. So we've got those pieces all set up for you as well to make it easier to get all these materials. And then the last thing that we're really proud of is we really want our new books to give district schools and teachers more choice and flexibility. So we don't think of these books as a full curriculum, right, that are guiding you to do what you're supposed to be doing on each day. We really think about them as a supplement that allows you to do a couple things. One, if you have an existing curriculum and one of the lessons is not really doing what it needs to do, you can substitute that out. Another way you can do this is you can use this to up the rigor of your different courses by adding a few of these investigations in. Or you can even take these and use these as the foundation of your curriculum and then fill in the blanks with other things that are moving in. And these are kind of like the shared common experience of students. Whatever that you decide to do, we wanted to make sure that everybody has choice and flexibility and not just following what somebody else is saying that you must do in which order and how much time, because every school is different. Every school has unique needs. Every school has different teachers and students who are interested in different things. So we really want that to give you as much choice and flexibility as we can. So with that was a lot in a short amount of time. So once again, we can do questions here. Krista, are there any ones to start off with right now?
I do. So Tracy asked this, and it was, I think, around the time you were showing stage 2. Are the passages differentiated?
So no, so what we do right now is when we're thinking about the differentiation piece of this, what we were really thinking about is how do we provide opportunities for students to grow in their ability to find useful information in text. So what I mean by that is quite often in schools, we give kids a level of reading or a text to practice their reading. Very rarely we ask them what information will be helpful. And that's what we really turn to when we get outside of the classroom. Um, so when we're outside the classroom, we usually read for one or two reasons. One, either because it's interesting and we're going to entertain, or we're stuck and we need to find something out. So we want to give kids as many opportunities to learn how to find information in text that's going to be helpful for them. So what we do instead of having these differentiated, we build in all of these different kind of supports that are in there, and these are in the book that describe what they do. And part of the ways that you handle that is you've kind of gradually release who's responsible for all the pieces of the reading. So when I come in and do a first ADI lesson to demo for somebody, what I will do is I will read the text aloud. And then as I'm reading aloud, I will often point out things like, oh, that may be helpful, or that might be interesting, or that might be useful. And then as we get through the text, then you have the kids in a group talk over what they thought was most useful in terms of the overall guiding question, writing those ideas out, and then share out. The next time you do it, you read again, but this time you don't highlight those things, still have students talk. The next time the students read and talk, and then another time they can, or you can have them annotate that time, and then the fourth time just have them read and find the key information. So the idea behind this is to have text that include the ideas that they need to learn, but they're really pulling in and using each other as a resource to develop their reading skills. And all of that's described in the teacher notes under those teaching tips and attending to equity and all of those pieces.
Awesome. Okay. Let me go here. I think Chloe wanted just to be able to see the table of contents again, if you don't mind flipping back. And
Sure.
also, if you want to check that out, you can go to shop.argumentdriveninquiry.com. Just go to the book and there's a picture of it. And there's also a link in the description so you can see the like an ebook sample of it. So
I don't know which table of contents would be the most useful, but you can kind of, here's a few of those. So like so each of these have at least 8 investigations in them, and it's really driven by whatever the standards are at that. So if you're thinking about Earth-based science for NGSS, there's ones that focus on moon phases and movement of planets and other bodies in the solar system. And then there's a lot more in terms of climate and weather and those kinds of things. If you're thinking about 6th grade Texas, we've got our physical science investigations that are really talking about forces and motion and classifying changes, and then moon phases, characteristics of atmosphere, those kinds of things. So they're really aligned to whatever the TEKS or the NGSS are saying for that band, that grade, or that grade band.
awesome. And question from Courtney about, will tomorrow's session be different from today's? I think I can answer that and tell you about that much will be different. Am I right?
Yeah, so what we'll be doing tomorrow is really, it'll be talking about, since the books have the same characteristics, we'll be going over those same characteristics again, but I'll be showing examples from the high school books instead of middle school.
And then another awesome question from Courtney, not related to the books, but how can those of us who are doing ADI in our classrooms help get this process into more schools?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So I think we're actually really pretty excited about these books as a first step in there. So we have been thinking about that question quite a bit over the years, right? So what is it that helps with buy-in? What gets people excited? I think that's the first step. Is to create a need, right? So If we're spending a lot of time in classrooms where we're just either reading or being talked to about science and memorizing stuff, getting to this point of like we can be giving kids more opportunities to do science, right, and getting them excited about it and develop identities that they find themselves being a science person because it's interesting and relevant to them. Once you have that need, then it's like, well, here's a possible way to do it. Here's a resource. You don't have to create things from scratch. And then also, then we try our best to provide opportunities for people to talk and learn this. So we can either come out to a school district and work with your teachers, or you can send folks to our facilitator institute and they can learn all of this stuff and they can come back. Or we have what we're calling our ADI Fest this year, where people can get together and talk about their stories of what they've done, how that's changed things, lessons they've learned. It's really a great opportunity to have a chance to talk with like-minded educators about what they've done, so you're not really going at it alone, and kind of get recharged to those kinds of things. So that's also a great thing to do as well is, hey, come out to a conference that's talking about doing good stuff in science and get excited again, kind of thing.
Awesome. Two more questions. I know we're going over. Sorry, just want to make sure I get to everyone's questions. Sorry, Tracy, is the content covered in the Texas book the same as the content covered in the NGSS book? Or in other words, is it worth buying both sets of books to get more content?
They are different, right? So there is a little bit of overlap. Every once in a while, there will be a very similar investigation or the same one across ranks when they're exactly the same thing. So like when people want to talk about changes of matter or something like that, that's both in both sets of standards. But what's interesting about Texas versus NGSS, they're very different in terms of focus of what we're expecting kids to do at certain grades and those kinds of things. So there is not a ton of overlap. So if you're looking for more content, it does not hurt at all to get like a Texas version and an NGSS version.
And I think one of the last questions we had from Teresa, what is the best way to transition from the old books materials to the new one in their curriculum?
So I think that's probably the best time to do that is actually take advantage of new standards, right? So as we are often moving through the new standards and the new alignment, I know here in Texas especially, those go into play this year, are really going into play right now. And that's the time to say, okay, we had good stuff that we were working with that were tied to the old ones, but now we've changed grade levels on different ideas. There's more of a focus on three-dimensional instruction. The recurring themes are completely new. Those weren't in there before. This is the time to kind of update things. And the idea is it's not scary. It still has a lot of the same pieces, but there's just more of a focus on these three dimensions. It's actually one less stage. There's more scaffolding in this. Probably the best way to say it is just like the new standards have been updated. You can think of this as a new iPhone, right? The latest and greatest has come out. This is the time to change and upgrade with new standards that are coming out. That's probably the way I would tackle it, and then spend some time embedding new things into your curriculum for those shared experience and things like that, as here's how we can together address these new standards.